most of the Palestinian people don't think that either American presidential candidate, Republican Donald Trump or Democrat Joe Biden, would fundamentally change the American policy that has favored Israel over the years. They do believe, however, that getting rid of Donald Trump would pave the way for improved relations after years of a stalemate. To highlight all these things, I have with me Dr. James Rugby from Washington, D.C., who co-founded the Arab American Institute in 1985 and serving as its president. Dr. Zoghbi wrote many books, including the highly acclaimed book, Arab Voices, and he is serving in leadership roles in the Democratic National Committee. It's good to have you with us, Doctor.
Thank you.
The American strategy for the Middle East, especially in terms of the strategic relations with Israel as an ally, will not change regardless of who is in power, Joe Biden or Donald Trump. What is your take on that, sir?
Well, let's pull this apart and look at it in two ways. First, the strategic relationship will not change with the United States. That is true, but the Democratic Party's approach to Israel and the Palestinians will be different. And here are the following the points I'd make. First is that Joe Biden has committed to returning the situation to the status quo ante before Trump in most respects. Aid will continue, will start again to UNRWA. Aid will start again to the Palestinian territories. The consulate in East Jerusalem will reopen. They will work to reopen the PLO office in Washington. And they will begin a strategic, a new dialogue with the Palestinian leadership. Those are things that will change, and they're positive. What will also change is that within the Democratic Party today, there is a growing awareness of the legitimacy of Palestinian rights and a real pressure to advance those rights. You saw it in the Bernie Sanders campaign. You see it in the election of new progressive members of Congress across the country, whose numbers will double in this election. Legislation being proposed by them is significant, and the pressure that will come from these progressive voices within the Democratic Party will be very helpful in moving the Biden administration in a better direction. Early signs are there. I mean, look, Joe Biden has said he opposes the BDS movement, but at the same time he says he will protect the constitutional right of every American citizen to support BDS if that's what they choose. That's an important difference between Joe Biden today and where the Democratic Party was even in 2016. And he also spoke out and condemned Israel for denying Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar from visiting. He condemned Israel for not allowing them to visit. So there are differences, and I think the differences are important.
Yes, sir, but you know that the Trump administration has taken many peace-killing steps, including the transfer of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and the approval of the Israeli annexation plan to make annexation of the West Bank official and formal. Do you think that Joe Biden administration, if he wins the elections and establishes his administration, would reverse such steps or let bygones be bygones?
Well, I think the embassy move was a disaster, and it was fundamentally wrong and a violation of international law and agreements. I think it would be very difficult for Joe Biden, given the politics in the country, to reverse that decision. It's tragic. I feel very upset about it. I don't think anyone is going to be able to reverse it. But with regard to annexation, Joe Biden has said he opposes annexation. What we would like him to do is to place conditions on Israeli behavior so that as they seize more land or build more settlements, there'll be punishments. He hasn't agreed to that at this point. But I do think that there will be more restraints imposed on Israel should Biden become elected. I think that the Trump plan will be thrown out the window on day one. I don't think that the Trump deal of the century is going to continue to be on the the front burner. Americans are going to reject it. The administration will throw it away, and we'll start in a very different place.
Yes, while I'm speaking with you now, the American ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, is at a real settlement, which is a few kilometers away from Ramallah, with the Israeli officials in order to legitimize and legalize the work of some American institutions and firms in the Israeli colonial settlements, believing that even if Biden comes to power, it would be difficult for him to change this status. But from your own perspective and based on your experience in this field, how would Biden deal with such American institutions, whether scientific or academic or commercial institutions in the Israeli settlements?
Look, David Friedman, as bad as Trump has been, David Friedman has been a disaster. He is Israel's ambassador to Israel, and makes no bones about it. I mean, from the first day he took over as ambassador, he began pressuring the State Department to take the word occupation or occupied out of the annual human rights report. He wanted Jerusalem recognized as the capital, and has done so and pressured the State Department to do it. Even before Trump acted, David Friedman was pushing. He's long time been a supporter of extremist settlements and settlement leadership, and he's now taking the step you mentioned today that I think is illegal and encourages American aid to be used for more illegal purposes and American companies and institutions to participate in these illegal activities. We will oppose this. We will oppose it vigorously, and we will have, I think, a better chance of opposing it with Joe Biden in the White House than we will certainly with Donald Trump in the White House. No one listens to us in the Trump administration. We'll have an open door in the Biden administration. And I think that while it'll be difficult to reverse all that Friedman has done, we will have an obligation and an opportunity in a Biden administration to be able to push forward a very different agenda.
Yeah,
anything Friedman has done has to be reversed, just like what Trump has done.
Yeah, and there were many voices in the Democratic Party calling on Biden to condition the U.S. aid to Israel on stopping the colonial settlement construction in the occupied Palestinian territory. If he wins the elections, Mr. Biden, would he adopt this approach, or it's difficult for him because of, the balance of power of the lobbies in the United States?
The balance of power is changing, and that's the good news. Within the Democratic Party today, I believe that we have even at best an even balance with the pro hardline Israel groups, and I think we're going to continue this fight, and I think we'll have a better chance of winning it in the Biden administration than we do now. Joe Biden did not support. I was one of the people pushing hardest for conditionality on aid. They didn't agree with me, but I think that we're going to win that battle in the next 4 years. I think we will. And here's why we will. Not only because we'll have a greater opportunity within a Democratic administration, but our numbers and our strength are growing within the Democratic Party, and the behavior of Israel will not change. If Netanyahu became a peacenik overnight, we might not win this battle. But he will continue his illegal, outrageous behavior. He's been emboldened to do this, not only he personally, but the Likud and the hardline right in Israel has been encouraged by the Americans to continue this behavior, and we will therefore have the opportunity to respond to what he does. So I think we're gonna show some signs of progress in the next 4 years.
Yeah. When it comes to the Republicans, now let's assume that Donald Trump is going to win the elections and get to the White House and the Oval Office once again. There might be two perspectives. The first one, that he supported Israel so much during the first term in order to win the Jewish votes for the second term. But during the second term, according to the American Constitution, he can't run for the third time. And so he might change his policies towards the Middle East and towards Palestine in particular. What perspective you go with, Dr. Zogby?
I've been doing this work for over 40 years now, and I've always heard that in the second term they'll be better. It's nonsense. We know the colors of this man. We know his behavior. But we also know his those around him and their behavior. This will not change. He'll get worse. God forbid he wins the second term, not only because of Israel-Palestine, but because of the damage he's done to America, the damage he's done internally to our politics, the incitement to hatred, the hatred of foreigners, the hatred of blacks, the hatred of immigrants and refugees. This man will not change. This force doesn't change its colors. And in the second term, he will be worse. And he's not going for Jewish votes. He's going for Christian evangelical, right-wing Christian evangelical votes. That's 41% of the Republican Party right now. And that's the crowd that he appeals to. And that's the crowd that has given him and the Republican Party support. He won't change because the party won't change. There is an internal debate in the Democratic Party right now that is intense. There is no debate in the Republican Party right now, and that's a shame. The Republican Party of George Herbert Walker Bush and Jim Baker, it doesn't exist anymore. Those people have left the Republican Party and no longer have a voice there. In the Democratic Party, however, the voices of Jesse Jackson, who I worked with in the 80s, and Bernie Sanders continue to be strong and are growing. And in particular, in the Jewish community, the progressive Jewish community, there are groups like J Street and Jewish Voice for Peace and Bend the Arc and a whole range of other groups, if not now, that are growing and are defining the politics of young Jews. And the Jewish community, the progressive Jewish community, and the Arab American community, and the Black Lives Matter movement are playing an increasingly important role in the Democratic Party. No such parallel effort exists on the Republican side, and I believe we're going to win the battle in the Democratic Party. We'll win the battle with Joe Biden, and I think we'll make real change in the next 4 years.
Yes, and Doctor, with regard to normalization between some Arab countries and Israel, how would further Arab normalization look under either administration? Would, for example, Donald Trump strong arm other Arab countries like Sudan to normalize with Israel? And if Biden wins the election, would he dismantle the web of the authoritarian alliances that Donald Trump supported and promoted? What do you think?
I think there'll be a very different American foreign policy in the Middle East. Donald Trump has sought these trophies, feeling that it made him look good. Certainly he wanted to look good with the fundamentalist right wing. Each country that has normalized with Israel has done so for its own interests, and we've been polling on this issue, and we see that in the Arab world today, the Palestinian cause has declined in importance. That is an issue that we have to address. We have to develop a strategy to figure out why the decline in support and what we do to change that dynamic in the Arab countries. Some Arab countries say we're not going to be subsidizing the occupation, and that's what they feel that they've been doing all these years. They don't feel that there's a way forward. And in our polling, what we found is that many in the Arab world say, sure, normalize, but maybe it'll give us the leverage to push Israel to make peace. Maybe it will create support for Palestinians if we do it. So there are reasons why some Arab countries have proposed normalization, but there's another reason why Donald Trump wants it. It's not to help Palestinians. It's not to create peace. It's to give him a trophy in a White House event to make him look like he's a big, important president. The Sudan one was an embarrassment. I mean, we went way too far to push Sudan to do this, again, because of a White House trophy. I don't see any other countries in the pipeline. And if Joe Biden wins, there's not going to be any pipeline at all, because there won't be a need to do this, to win the support of the Trump administration to make any deals. And Joe Biden is not going to encourage it because he doesn't need it. And it's not going to be important as a way forward. The way forward will be to create regional security. The way forward will to put an end to wars and to put an end to all of the conflicts that exist in Syria and in Iraq and in Yemen and in Libya and elsewhere. The region is in turmoil, and we will need an American strategy to help us play a constructive role. I think that will be the priority, and not finding ways to exacerbate tensions in order to make the president look good and big. So I think we're in a different place right now.
Yeah, yes. When we talk about the Palestinian cause and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we have to talk about the human rights, the Palestinians' human rights that are violated on a daily basis by the Israeli occupation army and the Israeli colonists, the settlers. You must have heard about the Palestinian prisoner Maher al-Akhras, who has been on hunger strike for 94 days, protesting his detention without a due process. And you heard about the 18-year-old Amir Snober, the boy who was beaten on the neck to death by the Israeli soldiers days ago. Now, in the United States, when the human rights organizations there, the activists who support the human rights, whether for the Palestinians or others, what is the echo of such things committed by the Israeli occupation army and by the Israeli settlers against the Palestinians?
Look, I know well the issue of undue violence and torture, and of administrative detention. I started the Palestine Human Rights Campaign in 1975 and ran it for 5 years until I started the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee in 1980. But the human rights of Palestinians has been my first love, and it remains my love. And I grieve for the continued suffering, and I'm angry at the way that those human rights are ignored. I have believed for years, and I differ with some of my colleagues in this movement, that at the end of the day, the primary issues for us shouldn't be one state, two states, three states, four, whatever. The issue should be human rights and justice. That is the critical issue that we must address. Palestinians can work out their own issues, but for us, supporters of Palestinians abroad, our primary concern has to be human rights and the defense of human rights. That's why I'm pleased that we have Congresswoman Betty McCollum proposing legislation focusing on human rights of children. That's why I'm pleased that we have a BDS movement that is growing on campuses across the country and winning victories. That's why I'm pleased that many of the progressive Jewish organizations I've talked about are encouraging BDS as a way of putting pressure on Israel. But what we need is another Palestine human rights campaign, like the one that I started in the 70s. We started it because groups, international organizations, were not adopting Palestinian individual cases. So nobody knew about them. I know about them because I get an email from Hanan Ashrawi telling me. In the old days, I used to hear about them because Felicia Langer, who was the attorney I worked with, and Israel Shahak, who started the Israeli League for Human and Civil Rights, they would write to me. Other than Hanan, I know there are human rights groups, but they're in Palestine, but they're not projecting and mobilizing and organizing in the United States and pressuring the various groups to adopt these cases, and that must be done. There must be a pressure campaign, not just on the Biden administration, not just on the Congress. There has to be a pressure campaign on Amnesty International, on Human Rights Watch, on the various the church and peace organizations to adopt the Palestinian human rights cases, the individual cases of hunger strikers, of victims of torture, of victims of police abuse, and there will be a receptive ear. Black Lives Matter, as a movement, grew out of this use of oppressive violence by authorities. They are sensitive to this, and they identify with us because they see what is happening to them in America is what's happening to Palestinians at the hands of Israel. And they also see, incidentally, that the Israeli police are training American police in some of the same tactics. We have to build that bond stronger and pressure the various organizations in America to adopt these individual cases and to make them the kind of focus. Not the focus shouldn't be the Palestinian Authority. The focus shouldn't be one state. The focus shouldn't be negotiations, or we talk about international law. You know, at the end of the day, most Americans don't give a damn about international law because they don't even know what it means. But they will care about a young man beaten to death if they know about him.
Yes.
If they hear about him, feel his pain. They have to know these cases, and it's the responsibility, I think, of the human rights work in Palestine to project these cases more vigorously and build allies in America.
And this leads me to my final question to you, sir. You mentioned Representative Macron's Palestinian Children Bill. If the Democrats win the White House and the Congress, do you think that it is going to be endorsed as a law, or it is still premature to expect that?
I don't know if it becomes law, but I know that we'll continue to grow the endorsers for it. And I've spoken with a woman who's running. She's going to be a first-term congresswoman. I'm pretty sure she'll win her election in November. She's running she's running against a Republican, but the Republican has no chance of winning. I talked to her the other day. She said, the minute I get to Congress, I'm endorsing Betty McCollum's bill. And that's true, I know, of others as well. The number will grow. And if it becomes law, that's one thing. It would be great. I don't know if it becomes law, but what I do know is that it will continue to grow and gain support, building increased support to put pressure on the Biden administration to apply conditions to aid to Israel. So it's a vehicle, it's a tool that we will use to grow support in Congress. And I think it will, whether it passes, I don't know, but it will grow in support for sure.
Yeah, Dr. Jim Zobi, co-founder of the Arab American Institute, thank you very much for your time and for all this information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we come to the end of our episode for today. Please watch us on our Facebook page, PBI. And for now, from me, Osama Nazal, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.